Ink up. Slow down. Write your rhythm with Script and Scribe.
Hi everyone, welcome to Script and Scribe. I'm Kat, and today we're looking at the 5 pens that I use the most, including the 5 inks. And do let me know in the comments what yours are. This video is actually inspired by a recent video about EDCs from Grace at Wildly Imaginable. Now, if, like me, when you were new, you wondered what an EDC was, I took like a week to figure it out because I joined the fountain pen community online and I'd see this, but I was too busy to sort of like investigate for over a week. And then I was finally, you know what, I have to look this up. And EDC just means everyday carry, which to me implies some form of portability, and that would have been right for me about 5 years ago when I used to commute and would have to carry everything with me all the time. But now for me, an everyday writer is not something that I have to throw into my backpack or into my handbag because I'm mostly working from home. So long session pens are also my everyday writers. And I think that means for me, an EDC has come to mean something that I use on the regular. We all have our own criteria for what it means to meet the needs of an EDC for us. Portability, ink capacity, durability, cost, maintenance, any of those. But I'm going with Grace's definitions to see how my usual pens match up with the 5 areas that she talked about, which include comfort in terms of how comfortable the pen is to write with, especially in long sessions. Pen size and grip matter to her. Ease of use, how quick and convenient it is in terms of uncapping, refilling, having a clip. Reliability, consistent performance, no hard starts or flow problems. Durability, ability to handle constant use without looking too worn or needing too much upkeep. Writing experience. The most important thing, I think, for Grace was, alongside the comfort, the writing experience. She wants that joy in journaling, and I think a lot of us can relate to that. She did note that price isn't a factor in her video, in terms, not that it's not a factor for her, but that it's too subjective for people to actually use that criteria in the same way meaningfully. And that's why I like the criteria that she put together in terms of it being quite universal in feel. Before I tell you, do you recognize this pen? I sort of feel that this brand is getting more and more popular, so I wouldn't be surprised if you do recognize what this is. It is the Taiwanese brand Opus 88, and this is the Omar model as a demonstrator. Considering the first criteria of comfort, yes, this is a very comfortable pen. It bounces well. I don't keep it posted. I don't think it's meant to be posted because you want quick access to the top, which is actually a valve, something we'll get to in a moment. I think it's 38 grams, but I'll double check that for you. So the first way in is going to be capped, just under 37 grams inked. And the second way in is going to be uncapped, and that's roughly 20.5 grams. I'm not going to weigh every pen. It's just that this one looked like it was going to be heavy, and then it isn't. When it comes to ease of use, this is very easy to eyedropper fill straight from an ink bottle, and you don't have to worry about fiddly cartridges or ink converters to fill up. And it's also eco-friendly, of course, to do the eyedropper system. So since the ink is in the body of the pen, we'll just get the sample out of there and make sure not to actually spill the ink that's in the body onto us or onto the notebook. And when we mix the sample a little bit, you'll see more variation or tonal shading in there, but we'll talk about the ink later. Right now we're focusing on the pen, and the ease of use is also something that the valve provides, because the valve lets you increase and decrease the flow of ink to the nib and the feed, which is fantastic because you don't tend to get, I haven't ever had a hard start with an Opus 88, because the moment that I feel like it's feeling a bit dry on the page, I just turn the valve Now this is another Opus 88. It's the Jazz, which is slightly smaller, and I'm showing it to you because I've got a shimmer ink in here which some pens can't handle, but this one does, especially because I've got a broad nib on there. But if it ever felt like the shimmer was starting to clog up in the feed, all I'd need to do is turn the valve, and then you get more ink flow down into the nib unit and through the nib. Speaking of nibs, I love the Opus 88 brand for the Yovo nibs. I've got the Flex Fine on the Omar, and then I've got the broad on this Jazz, and I don't just stick them on the Opus 88s. This is in the good blue. It's a 1.5 stub. And the reason I love these nibs so much is the next criteria, which was reliability. I find the Yovo Opus 88 brand nibs so reliable, so much so that I got the whole range of them, the ones that I didn't have already in actual Opus 88 pens. I bought the different sizes from Style and Stilo, and they retailed for about £18 each, and they were such a good investment because I swapped them out of the pens that they fit into, and I find them just perfect for me because they provide a really nice crisp line and are never the ones that hard start on me. The exception, I suppose, is the extra fine flex, which only seems to work consistently in the Opus 88s. When I put that extra fine flex into the good blue, it does actually skip. So I think it really needs the ability to adjust the amount of ink that is flowing into the nib, and also just to use a wet ink with that particular one. But considering the range going from extra fine all the way through to a 2.3 stub, that is a really good, reliable success rate. And going back to the criteria of ease of use, I find it really handy to be able to have a variety of nibs that fit a variety of model for the Opus 88s. There's an exception in the Opus Flora, not the demonstrator, but the big chunky one that's got like a vase cap with a 2.3 stub. That doesn't fit the other nibs. You don't swap them out, but I found a hack for that, and I'll share that another time. If you want to look it up, it's an Asvine, and yeah, that will be a different video. But for the most part, 99% of the nibs swap in and out of each other, which I think is really useful. And also that valve is just perfect, especially if, for example, with a wet ink, I just smudged a bit of the ink at the top there, and I turned the valve, and it's become a little bit more restrained with the rest of the flow, which means that it will dry quicker on the page. But let's talk about this juicy ink, which is a mix of Wicked Witch from Wearing Gill, and I've mixed it with Aqua Lagoon from Diamine. And the reason I mixed it, usually what I do is I have leftovers, but this I actually mixed because I was getting used to using the dark Wicked Witch on its own, sort of navy color, and I just wanted to sort of like lift it. And I was amazed with how much shading you get when you put Aqua Lagoon in there. And I really wish I had created a recipe, because I don't know how many drops of Aqua Lagoon to how many drops of Wicked Witch I have in there, but I love this tone of blue. For the next criteria, durability, I think this would score really high. It is really robust. It's got this acrylic resin construction that's not stingy. It's really quite thick, and you've got the space for the ink, but overall there is a lot of pen body to the pen, so I'm not worried about it cracking. And I have dropped it a few times and haven't had anything happen to it, but I would recommend do not drop it nib first, because obviously the nib is very fragile in comparison to the rest of a pen, and yeah, you can bend your nib, but otherwise I think that this is a really good pen to invest in if you're looking for something that's got structural endurance. It's good. I'll keep the writing experience criteria really brief, because I think by now you know that I am loving the experience of this and would rate it 10 out of 10. So this next bit is not just for the Opus 88 Omar, but really for all my demonstrators. And heads up, I've got a couple more demonstrators in this lineup. There's something about the aesthetics and the practicality that I just love. And I'm going to not be able to verbalize all of what I enjoy about demonstrators, but I will say that I find them extremely helpful and reassuring. Reassuring in terms of you know how much ink you've got in a pen. So if you're starting a long writing session, you don't have to, like unscrew it and check your cartridge and everything. But equally, I do make assumptions sometimes, and I very often think of Opus 88s as eyedropper pens, although there are exceptions like the wooden pens and I think the Coloro model, which use cartridges. And I think of Benu pens, for example, as cartridge pens. But a couple of weeks ago, I eyedroppered a Pixie. And of course, it was totally opaque. I couldn't see through. And with the assumption that, it is a cartridge pen, and forgetting that I had eyedroppered it, I opened it up. Ink went everywhere, all over my hands, over the table, over the notebook. So I do find, as a visual person, it is reassuring to actually not have to track in my mind what I've done to particular pens. Yeah. Now I just remembered another thing that's versatile or provides variety with these Opus 88 pens, and that's the ability to turn your pen into a clipless one, because they allow you to unscrew the top of the cap and remove the clip section. So I don't necessarily find that useful in terms of I like having a clip, but if you do not like clips, you have that option. I would just worry that I'm going to have a higher probability of dropping my pen now because the clip was stopping it from rolling off the desk. So I was going to go on to the next pen, and then I realized that although I said this is a fine flex, which you can see from the cutouts on the side, and there's no cutouts on that broad, the cutouts on the side are what give it the bounce to the nib, and there's just an extra bit of softness that you don't get with the regular fine. So I enjoy the flex now and then I'll stitch it out if I want something really crisp and more rigid again. Looking at this fresh page, the ink behaved really well, didn't bleed through the side of the paper. Anyway, this is the second pen. It is the Didao 9019 with a fine nib from Jinhao, and it is another demonstrator. Now, Didao, I didn't know when I got this pen, actually means broadsword, and that just makes so much sense considering that the nib is huge. So you got a very big nib, and even though it is a fine, it does tend to write more like a Japanese medium or even broader. But I love that little detail that the Didao means a broadsword or big blade. I also love that I can see everything inside it again. Somehow I always forget just how comfortable this pen is. I tend to use it unposted, but I know a lot of people do post the Didao. And the nib for me is the one that I love the most. The fine glides amazingly, and the fine is not, conventional, because look, that's a flex fine, and this is a lot broader. You can instantly tell. So it handles sheen and shimmer for me like a boss, and that's what we've got in here. It's not immediately apparent, but this is a sheening ink, and we'll see the variation when I zoom in. It's really easy to use, and the filling system is purely to use an ink cartridge or the provided ink converter. And I would highly recommend using the ink converter because the capacity is super. I think it's like double the capacity of a large or tall international standard cartridge. So if you like to have a good amount of ink in your pens, that's the way to go. Reliability wise, I've had premium pens that have hard started straight out the box, and then I have to clean out loads of grease or whatever production stuff was in the nib section. These have never been a problem. They've always written straight out the box, so there's quality control. I've never had hard starts with them. I know I've seen some people say they've had a hard start with a Jinhao 82. Again, I haven't had that. So I am really impressed by Jinhao in general, and this particular one for handling shimmer like a champ. Durability-wise, I think it will take a few knocks, but I don't reckon that it is as robust as, say, the one that we looked at before, the Opus 88 Omar, and that's because it hasn't got that same strength of body, but it doesn't look brittle either, so it seems pretty robust or able to withstand some, everyday knocks, but not, I suppose, being crunched under something heavy. And I mean, if we're being fair, that's not a fate that we want any of our pens to suffer. Clearly, I enjoy the writing experience. I think it's fab, it's smooth, it's reliable, and the lines look good. Some variation and some bounce. There's a real softness and responsiveness to the nib. So if you want something extremely crisp with zero variation to pressure or responsiveness to pressure, then this isn't it. But if you want something that has the slight responsiveness, not in any way flex, but just a sort of softness to the way that it writes, then this nib would really suit you. Now, the green sheen on this ink isn't coming through as much as I hoped. I can certainly see it in real life, but we better do a sample. It is Deadly Nightshade from Diamine, and this was a Cult Pens exclusive. And this will always make me smile, these little skulls in there. I had a week's delay when I was getting my bottle of ink, and they said, sorry, we're trying to put in the little skulls as quickly as possible. We've just, had a rush off how many people have ordered this. So it was a Halloween special. And those skulls actually also have a practical purpose. They help mix up the shimmer in the ink. We actually only saw one skull, but there's 2 skulls in every bottle, and they help separate out the sheening and the shimmer. And that's because you've got a dark purple plum base with a ghastly green sheen, as they describe it, and some shiny silvery shimmer in there as well, so the sparkly bits. And that all sort of settles at the bottom, and this is the perfect mixer to have those skulls in, as well as having a sort of Halloween touch and fitting the Deadly Nightshade title. So it all works really well for me, and it's got my 2 favorite colors in one, purple and green. But you do notice a huge difference between writing with it, which doesn't affect the paper on the other side, and doing a sample, which is bleeding through to the other side. So yeah, definitely not one of the ones you want to be using huge amounts of on a page of Hobonichi Cousin, but if you want to write with it, it works really well. My next pen is also a budget pen from the Pilot Kakuno Madoromi range, and Madoromi basically means drowsy or a feeling of tranquil state, and I always thought of this as a dusty grey, but it is the one that's called Drowsy Brown. And it's got a sort of brown lilac undertone with grey. So, I guess it is a drowsy brown, but I still see grey. So I may be a bit uncertain about the color, but what I am certain about is, yes, the comfort is there, and this is a hyped pen for a reason. It is light, but not too light, and it balances really well. Now, the Koekas are about 12 grams, Koeka Sport Mellow Blue, but the shape of this is different, and somehow that balances a lot better for me. I think this has a similar weight, but yeah, the shape overall seems to affect the ergonomics for me and makes this the preferable one. Of course, we're all different. You might have the opposite opinion. You might go, you know what, I would like a light pen and I prefer the Kaweco Sport. For ease of use, this is really straightforward. You do have to use the Pilot proprietary ink cartridges rather than international standard, but if you've got access to those, then it's really easy. And also you can use bottled ink if you buy a Pilot ink converter. So yeah, it's super easy. And even without an ink converter, you can fill up an old empty cartridge. This one's filled up with 683 Sailor Studio ink. I think the durability is going to be pretty standard. It will withstand everyday use and, a couple of gentle knocks in your backpack, but it's certainly not a tank. I think it will do the job. But I also don't think it's brittle, so it doesn't look prone to cracking. Although it's a budget pen, I think the savings are in the body, not using a very expensive resin. The nib itself is actually still really consistent. You get the Pilot crisp lines that you get in more expensive pens. And despite it being a budget pen, I do love that complex color that I can't describe, that sort of taupe, brown leaning purple / grey, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I think reliability wise, the nib is just a dream. And that brings us to overall writing experience. You get lovely feedback while writing is consistent. No line variation in this extra fine, so great for precision work and perhaps for some technical drawings. Something that needs that precision and very detailed work. Also small journals, I would say. There's little actual change when you change the pressure. Only when I go feather light do I see, slight variation in the width of the lines. And the ink, the 683 Sailor Studio ink, is described as brown with leaning towards purple, and sometimes also described as seal brown. And my next pen is going to be another Taiwanese brand, aside from the Opus 88 that we looked at earlier. It is this one, the TWSBI, which a lot of people know. And it's one of the most popular models as well. They're Eco, the piston filler. And I've got the 1.1 stub on here. Comfort-wise, it's amazing. I think this is why it is such a popular pen. It's got a good balance, not too light, not too heavy, not too thick, not too thin. It's really easy to use. You just put the nib into a bottle of ink and twist the knob at the top to pull the ink into the body of the pen. And the ink capacity is good as well. It's like 1.5 mil. It is pretty reliable, but unlike my other pens, it has actually burped some ink on the page, which really surprised me. But then when I looked it up, people were saying that it's because your nib comes loose from the rest of the nib unit. And that was right. All I had to do was sort of like press the tip of the nib on the page, and that sort of sent it back into position. It seemed to have slid forward, and it's only happened a few times, but it's certainly 3 times is more than any of the other pens. So just to be aware of that perhaps TWSBI has a tendency for that more than other pens. But let me know your experience. I've had mine for what I think is roughly 3 years now, and I haven't had a problem with durability, but I have seen people say that the caps have cracked on their TWSBIs, and so that's something as well to be aware of. But I haven't had a problem with this particular one. Overall, the writing experience is lovely. Of course, it isn't lovely when it burps ink on your page, but considering it's happened 3 times and I've owned it 3 years, that's like once a year, and it's extremely easy for me to forget and forgive. Otherwise, I really love the versatility of a stub, and this 1.1 is lovely. When you do the caps, you can see the variation in your writing, the italic if you go sideways, if you're doing upright cursive, and I've seen people do a much better version of what I'm about to attempt here, that sort of like typewriter look. Basically, it is good for calligraphic flair, giving you some really decent line variation to play with. Now there's 3 main pens that I use for shimmer inks. The first one we saw was the Jinhao Didao, and that's perfectly okay to use in a fine nib. And then I use medium and broad nibs from Benu. Really, they handle it so well. And then this one, this 1.1 stub, handled shimmer inks brilliantly. And what I've got in here is leftover purples together with 2 shimmer potions from Wiringild's Wicked Witch set. One of them is Mind Control, which has got a sort of holographic effect, slight purple leaning. And then the other one that I put the most of is Frost, which has got blue and silver sparkles in there. It's a combination of inks that tends to dry fairly quickly. I mean, you can already see the shimmer developing on the left side. Doing this video really brought home how much I like particular colors. So it's not a very balanced video in terms of showing you loads of different colors, because here we've got purple again, not a purple ink, but a purple pen. And yeah, it's something that I hadn't quite realized I tend to do as much as I do. This is the Pro Gear Slim from Sailor in Dusk. It's a Cult Pens exclusive. So you've got a mauve color resin body, and then you've got the really yellow gold sort of trim and a 14 karat gold nib. So it's one of the more premium pens in my everyday use. This is actually a bit of an outlier in terms of being the premium one, whereas others weren't. And even the ink is an outlier because it's a lot less saturated than my usual ink colors. But this combination is one of my favorites. I find the Pro Gear Slim one of the most comfortable pens to use. I love the balance of it. It is the perfect weight, width, and length for me, and weight-wise it's about 17 grams with it posted, and it's one of the few pens that I will actually post. Very often I find myself leaving a cap aside and then just using the pen body, but it is one of those designs where it just feels correct with the actual cap on the back of the pen. And I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but it gives that extra length, of course, and also just adds something. So I think they thought it out really well. As for ease of use, we've gone back to a regular cartridge system, and you can also have an ink converter. In fact, this one came with a teeny tiny ink converter. So I'm not a fan of the ink capacity, which makes it, I guess, another outlier factor for this one, because usually I like a lot of ink. Reliability, I've never had a problem with this one. It wrote straight out the box. It's been good with all the inks that I've paired it with. And I saw loads of people saying that this particular one, the Jane Eyre from Wiringiel, is a dry one and is best in medium nibs. Well, this is an extra fine nib. So I'm finding it a really reliable and consistent writer. Which brings us to the overall writing experience. This is one of my favorites. It has this pencil-like feedback. It's good with ink flow. It provides crisp lines, and I like seeing it visually. So unlike the other pens where I'm always like, I love demonstrators and I like to have something clear and I don't care about the actual resin color because I just want to see the ink. Well, this is, again, an exception. At times, I go for the aesthetic, I go for the resin, and that's the case here. I love that mauve tone together with the gold tone trim. And moving on to the ink, we've got Wiringiel Jane Eyre, and I'm not convinced I've got 100% match, but I think it is really close. This Jane Eyre ink is quite dry leaning, as I mentioned, so you can definitely team it up with a wetter ink if you'd prefer that in your Pro Gear Slim. And I do think the tone is correct, though. It's a sort of violet with grey undertones, which goes with this muted mauve of the resin. And that's it. Those are the 5 pens I use the most. Not necessarily my favorites, though sometimes, like this Pro Gear Slim, yes, my favorite. Then we got the Kakuno, then we've got the Twisby, and we've got the Dow and the Opus 88. These 5 pens are in regular use for me. Now I'll be cheeky and share with you another 5 pens that I use regularly. This Carco Master with a gold-plated extra fine nib for journaling, and this 1.5 stub Opus 88 nib in a The Good Blue body pen. And then we go on to the Bennu Daily Mate Joyful Saturday with a medium nib, and then we have this 3776 in Laurel Green with a medium nib, and finally we have this ink cursive which looks like a Jinhao 82 but is not. Here's the nib, totally different nib, and are so tempted to talk about this one, but we will leave that for another video because I've already been cheeky enough. Thanks so much for joining me, and let me know in the comments what your 5 everyday carries are. Thanks. Bye.